I want you to think about the last time someone made you feel like you didn't matter. Maybe it was a careless word. Maybe it was a look or the absence of one. Maybe it was the moment you realized that the people you had given your whole life to had been quietly, deliberately planning a future that didn't include you. Now imagine that moment happening in the middle of a crowded airport, with no luggage, no ticket home, no one to call, and the sound of your own son's footsteps walking away without a single glance back. That is where this story begins. And I promise you, by the time it ends, you will never look at the word dignity the same way again. My name is Blake Monroe, and I am 71 years old, a widow, a mother, and apparently, according to the people I trusted most, an inconvenience with a phone that could cover a Greyhound ticket if I sold it fast enough. Those were not my words. Those were my daughter-in-law, Tanya's words, delivered with a smile in the middle of Nashville International Airport, right before she wheeled her designer luggage into the first-class lane and disappeared through the security checkpoint without looking back. My son Mark walked right beside her, sunglasses on, carry-on in hand. Not a single word of apology. Not one. But I am getting ahead of myself, because for you to understand what happened at that airport, you need to understand what happened 2 months before it, on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, when I brought Jake his coffee and found him slumped in the hallway, the mug still warm in his hand. Jake Monroe was my husband for 42 years. 42 years of ordinary, irreplaceable life, of fights that ended in quiet forgiveness, of shared glances across rooms when no words were needed, of raising a son together, losing a pregnancy together, and trying again. I hummed off-key in the kitchen. He could never remember where I kept the cinnamon. I replaced our mattress after 30 years because I said I deserved better sleep. It was the kind of man who remembered the details that most people forget, and forgot the kind of things that most people waste time worrying about. He died of a massive stroke. The doctor said it was instantaneous. I stood at the kitchen sink for hours afterward, watching raindrops slide down the window, and I could not make myself move. The weeks after his funeral were the quietest of my life. People brought caceroles. They told stories I was too numb to absorb. And then, one by one, they went back to their own lives, as people do, as they must. The house felt enormous. His slippers were still under the nightstand. Each toothbrush sat beside mine as if nothing had changed. Some mornings, I would sit in the chair he loved most and try to remember the exact sound of his laugh, that deep, shoulder-shaking chuckle he got when something was really funny. I tried to hold on to every detail before it faded, and slowly, painfully, I was beginning to understand what it meant to grieve not just a person, but an entire way of being in the world. And then Mark came by, my son. He hugged me the way busy people hug, quick, distracted, already thinking about the next thing. He said Tanya thought it would be good for me to get away, a family trip to Florida for spring break. Change of scenery, fresh air, sand between my toes. Don't you think Jake would want that for you? He asked. And I, who had not left Tennessee in 5 years, who had been sitting in a dead man's chair trying to remember the sound of his laugh. I said yes. I clung to the word family like a life raft. I went home and opened the jewelry box I hadn't touched since the funeral. I found the gold band Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. He had saved for months for it. 10 more years, he had whispered when he slid it onto my finger. Then 10 more after that. I took it to the pawn shop. I used the money to contribute to the trip. Tanya had mentioned everyone pitching in. I offered without being asked. It felt good to still be needed. I packed carefully. I tucked a small framed photo of Jake into my carry-on. I chose my softest sweater, the one he always said made me look classy as hell. I folded a beach towel I hadn't used in years. I placed the paperback I'd been meaning to read for months in the front pocket. And before I zipped everything shut, I put a folded tissue in the top flap, just in case. I did not know that by the time I reached the airport, none of it would matter. That I would arrive at check-in and be told, politely but firmly, that there was no return flight booked under my name. That I would turn around and see Mark and Tanya already walking away. That I would follow them to the security line and hear Tanya say, with the casual certainty of someone delivering a weather forecast, that they had only bought me a one-way ticket, that the return trip I would figure out myself, that I had my phone, that if I needed bus money, I could sell it. I want to tell you exactly how that felt. Not the shock. Everyone understands shock. I want to tell you about what came after the shock, when the noise of the airport kept going around me and the world refused to pause for even 1 second to acknowledge what had just happened. A man with a stroller walked past. Teenagers in matching dance uniforms shouted across the terminal. Somewhere, a flight to Orlando was beginning final boarding. The sun hit the glass walls and hurt my eyes, and I stood in the middle of all of it, holding a printed itinerary. I now understood had been made for show, and I felt something I had not felt since I was 9 years old, waking on a father who never came back from a trip to the next town. Only this time, the person who left me was someone I had raised. I did not cry. I was too far past tears for that. Instead, I walked to the nearest bench, sat down with my back straight and my chin level, and I reached into my purse, past the tissues, past the peppermints, past the hand cream. My fingers found the envelope. The one Jake and I had called our break glass in case of fire fund. We had started it after his first heart scare. A 50 here, a 20 there. Sometimes 100 after a tax return. Never for groceries. Never for birthday gifts. Only for the day when one of us had no one else to rely on and needed to move fast. I counted it quietly. $960. Crisped from the bank. Not much, but mine. And enough. And tucked in beside it, right next to my heart, where I had kept it for exactly this kind of moment, was a small envelope with a business card inside. A lawyer, Jake's old friend, a man named J.R., who had handled our mortgage, our first will, and who had always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, you come find me." I looked at the departures board. Mark and Tanya's flight was on time. I watched their names scroll past and felt nothing except clarity. A calm, cold, absolute clarity. I picked up my phone and called JR. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I said, "I need to update my will." And just like that, everything changed. Not their lives, not yet. Mine. I flagged a cab outside the airport and gave the driver an address I hadn't spoken aloud in years. 287 Jefferson Street, Monroe and Wade Law Office. The streets of Tennessee passed outside the window like familiar pages of a book I had almost forgotten I knew by heart. J.R. was older, a little slower to stand, but his handshake was still firm. He said he was sorry about Jake. I thanked him. Then I sat down and told him I wanted to remove my son and daughter-in-law from every part of my will. He raised an eyebrow. He asked if I was sure. I told him I was. He did not ask why. He simply opened a folder, clicked his pen, and waited. Because some choices don't need explaining. They just need witnessing. We spent an hour going through the old will line by line, name by name. The house Jake and I had paid off after 30 years. The farmland my father left me, quietly leased for cattle grazing all this time. The investment accounts we had tended carefully, like a backyard garden. The savings I had kept separate. Money Jake had insisted I maintain just in case. Well, the case had arrived. And now everything that had once been meant for Mark and Tanya would go instead to an organization called Elder Haven, a non-profit supporting older adults who had been abandoned or financially exploited by their own families. Housing assistance, legal protection, community programs. Women like me, I also asked JR about legal protections, elder abuse, financial exploitation under false pretenses. It took notes. He told me we had options. Before I left his office, I had a new folder in my hand, a notarized document, and a plan I had made entirely on my own. I walked out into the sunlight, and I did not feel broken. I felt clean. I spent that night in a modest downtown motel. Thin curtains, thin mattress, but I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I changed the passwords on every account. He updated every emergency contact form that still listed Mark's name. I opened a safety deposit box in my own name and listed myself as the sole key holder. When the bank teller asked if I wanted to add a family member for access, I smiled and said, "Just me." Those two words, "just me," had once sounded like loneliness. That morning, they sounded like the beginning of something. He went back to the house one final time on a Tuesday morning. When I knew they would both be at work, I did not want a scene. He did not want shallow apologies delivered too late. I wanted only what was mine. He let myself in with the spare key still hidden in the planter, exactly where we had left it for emergencies. And this, I thought, qualified. The movers were fast and kind. I had hired them from 2 counties over. I wanted no gossip, no whispers. I took Jake's reading chair, the one that had molded to his back after decades of use. I took a box of books, our wedding album, his navy cap, my mother's quilt. He walked through every room slowly. The kitchen where I had baked every birthday cake. The living room where Jake and I had danced barefoot on our anniversary. The hallway. He did not cry. I had cried enough. I left my key in a sealed envelope on the counter with a note. "Don't call. Don't ask. I am exactly where I want to be." Then I closed the door behind me for the last time. The place I moved to was called Willow Grove, independent living for seniors with dignity. Jake and I had toured it once, quietly, years before. He had grinned and said he would only consider it if they had good pudding. Willow Grove had more than pudding. It had wide windows full of sunlight, hallways that smelled like lemon rather than antiseptic, soft jazz in the common room, and people, real people, who looked up when you walked in, not through you. "Adieu. Welcome, Mrs. Monroe," the woman at the desk said when I arrived. "We've been expecting you." It was the first time in months that someone had said my name like it mattered. I stood in the doorway of my corner unit, sunlight falling across the floor, Jake's chair already placed by the window, and I breathed. Just breathed. What Mark and Tanya would never know was that Willow Grove had been funded in part by the very donation I had made through Elder Haven. My estate was not simply a transfer of assets. It was a quiet revolution. I had built myself a place in the world where I would never again be an afterthought, where I was not a burden, not a relic, not the old lady who had paid for the trip. Who's Blake? 6 months passed. I joined the book circle, 6 women, and one soft-spoken man who brought crossword puzzles to share. I took watercolor classes on Thursdays and discovered my brushstrokes were shaky and my colors too bold, and I did not care one bit. I met a woman named Helen with a sharp tongue and a soft heart who made me laugh so hard I spilled coffee down my blouse. I signed up to lead a letter-writing workshop on Sunday mornings, and every evening at 5 o'clock, someone knocked on my door to say that dinner was ready. Not because they needed anything from me, simply because they wanted me there. There was a seat with my name on it, and I sat down in it without hesitation, without apology, without the quiet dread of wondering whether I was welcome. Then, on a morning I had circled in red on my private calendar, J.R. sent me one email, just one sentence. Letters had been delivered. By 11 o'clock, Mark's name was flashing on my phone. It rang 16 times that day. 16 times. I watched each call come in and let it pass. There was no message. Who's the frantic repeating ring of someone who has finally understood that the door is locked and they are no longer welcome inside? The next morning, an email arrived. Subject line: I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden. I opened it. I read it twice. The parts about misunderstandings, about the airport thing, about Tanya not meaning for it to feel like abandonment, and the part that told me everything I needed to know. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That sentence. That one sentence. They had thought I was too old, too soft, too desperate to be included to ever truly walk away. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my endurance for consent. They had treated my love like a well they could draw from forever, without ever once pouring anything back. And now they wanted the garden. The garden Tanya posted about online as her sacred space, never once mentioning my name. That garden now sat under the care of Elder Haven, whose regional director had already proposed converting the land into a therapeutic horticulture program for aging women with memory loss. My land. My choice? My legacy? I closed the laptop. I did not reply. That evening, I sat in my room with the window open, letting the breeze in, and I looked at the framed photo of Jake on the table, the one where he is laughing with his whole face, eyes nearly shut, hands mid-gesture. I lit a small candle beside it. Not for grief, for gratitude. I'm more than okay, I told him quietly. Then after a moment, I said the rest of what I needed to say. They thought I'd fall apart when they left me. They thought I'd panic, beg, chase after them. But you always knew, didn't you? You always knew I was stronger than that. They lost something that day at the airport. Not me. They lost their way back. Some nights, I walked the courtyard alone, hand resting on my cane, watching the light spill from the community room windows. I think about the word legacy, how everyone wants to leave something behind, how we spend our whole lives imagining what that something will be. And I have come to believe that the most radical legacy isn't money or property or a name carved somewhere permanent. It is the right to write the ending of your own story. Even if you have to tear up every page of the old one and begin again from nothing. I did that at 71 years old with $960 in a break glass envelope and a lawyer's business card tucked next to my heart. I tore up the old story and I wrote a new one. A story where I chose the people around me not by blood but by presence, not by obligation but by love, freely given and freely returned. And when I blow out the candle each night, I smile because I don't owe a single breath of gratitude to anyone who made me feel small. What I owe is to myself for standing up in that airport with no luggage and no ticket home and deciding that this was not the end. for walking to that bench with my back straight and my chin level and reaching for the envelope, for calling JR before their plane had even left the runway. For every quiet, deliberate, irreversible choice I made in the days that followed. Not in fury, not in spite, but in the clean, unshakable certainty of a woman who finally understood her own worth. They left me at the gate, and I built a life so full, so genuinely mine, that I no longer remember what it felt like to wait for someone who was never really coming back. That is not a sad ending. That is the only ending worth having. If Blake's story moved something in you, if you have ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you most clearly, then you already know that this channel exists for you. Tales of Life is where real stories live, where ordinary women do extraordinary things, and where the truth gets told plainly and without apology. If this story reached you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell me the moment you chose yourself, because those moments deserve to be spoken out loud. Like this video, subscribe to Tales of Life, and come back, because there are more stories waiting, and every single one of them matters.